Claire Anderson slowly chewed her ham sandwich in the break room of the Plaza Grande Hotel in Manhattan, the only moment of peace during her 14-hour shifts as a waitress. She was 27 years old, working 2 jobs to pay for her sick mother's treatments and the long-dead dream of becoming an architect. She was checking her phone when she heard quick footsteps behind her. A man in a $3,000 Armani suit sat down next to her, gently grabbed her hand, and whispered urgently, "Please, pretend I'm your husband. My life depends on it." It was Michael Thornton, the billionaire heir to the most luxurious hotel chain in America, the man every woman in New York dreamed of marrying. But what Claire didn't know was that 3 hitmen were searching for him at that very moment to kill him, that he had faked his own death to escape a forced marriage to a mob boss's daughter, and that this invisible waitress who served coffee every morning was about to become the only person capable of saving him. Claire Anderson's day always began at 5 in the morning in her studio apartment in Queens. 27 years old, graduated in architecture with highest honors, but without recommendations or family connections, she had discovered that dreams don't pay bills or her mother's expensive cancer treatments. For 3 years, she had worked as a waitress at the Plaza Grande Hotel, serving $500 breakfasts to businessmen who earned in an hour what she struggled to put together in a month. The Plaza Grande was a world apart, where Carrara marble floors reflected baccarat crystal chandeliers. Claire moved through these marvels like a ghost, invisible to the eyes of guests who considered her part of the furniture. She wore the impeccable black uniform, her brown hair always pulled back in a perfect chignon, and had learned the art of smiling even when her heart broke thinking of her mother waiting at home. That October morning, while arranging fresh flowers in the main restaurant hall, Claire noticed some agitation among the security staff. Men in black suits spoke quietly with the manager, showed photos on tablets, shook their heads with worried expressions. It wasn't her business, and she had learned long ago that waitresses had to be invisible and silent. During lunch break, Claire took refuge in the small break room reserved for staff. It was her only moment of peace in a day that saw her running from 6 in the morning to 8 at night, then going to her second job until midnight. She pulled out her homemade ham sandwich and began eating slowly, savoring those 20 minutes of silence. It was then that she heard quick footsteps in the corridor. The break room door opened cautiously, and Claire froze. In front of her was Michael Thornton, 32 years old, heir to the hotel empire that owned hundreds of hotels worldwide. She had seen him dozens of times in gossip magazines, always photographed with models or heiresses, but this man had none of the glacial confidence he showed in photos. He was pale, sweaty, with eyes that nervously scanned behind him. The Armani suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, his black hair disheveled. He looked like a caged lion, beautiful and dangerous, but terrified. Without saying a word, Michael sat next to Claire on the small plastic bench. A billionaire sitting in the staff break room, next to a waitress who earned $1,200 a month. Then he did something even more incredible. He gently took her hand with his, warm and slightly trembling. Michael's voice was low, urgent, charged with a desperation that Claire didn't expect from a man who owned everything. He quickly explained that he was in danger, that some very dangerous people were looking for him, that he needed her help to pretend to be someone he wasn't. At that moment, 3 men in black suits entered the break room, their faces hard and eyes scanning every corner. Claire felt the protective instinct kick in automatically. She didn't know why, didn't know this man's story, but something in his desperate gaze moved her. When one of the men asked if she had seen anyone strange, she smiled naturally and replied that she was having lunch with her husband. Michael played the part perfectly, tenderly kissing her hand and talking about their weekend together with a naturalness that surprised them both. The men observed them for a few seconds, then left without saying anything else. Only when their footsteps had faded away did Claire realize what she had done. She had lied to protect a complete stranger. Michael looked at her with an expression she had never seen before in anyone's eyes, pure gratitude mixed with something that seemed almost like admiration. In that moment, in the small break room of a luxury hotel, between a waitress with a ham sandwich and a billionaire on the run, something was born that would forever change their lives. In the minutes that followed the departure of the men in black, Claire and Michael sat in silence. She studied him with growing curiosity. Up close, Michael Thornton was even more fascinating than he appeared in glossy photos. He had aristocratic, but not cold features, green eyes that betrayed sharp intelligence, and above all, a vulnerability she didn't expect. Michael thanked Claire for what she had done, admitting he shouldn't have involved her in such a dangerous situation. But when she asked why those men were looking for him, Michael hesitated long before answering. The truth was complicated and involved very powerful and dangerous people. The story that emerged was worthy of a thriller. Michael had been promised in marriage since childhood to Valentina Toretti, daughter of a powerful boss from the south who had extended his business to the north. The marriage was meant to seal an alliance between the world of legal business and that of the underground economy, a merger that would give the Torettis access to international financial circuits. But Michael had discovered that accepting that marriage meant becoming an accomplice to trafficking that ranged from money laundering to much darker activities. When he had tried to back out, the threats became explicit. Either he married Valentina, or his family would pay the consequences. 2 weeks earlier, Michael had faked his own death in a boating accident off the coast of the Hamptons. His yacht had exploded during the night, and searches hadn't found the body. In reality, he had orchestrated everything down to the smallest detail. He had jumped into the water shortly before the explosion and been recovered by a speedboat waiting in the dark. Officially, Michael Thornton was dead, but the Torettis didn't believe it and were still looking for him. Claire listened with her mouth open. The story seemed impossible, too dramatic to be true. But there was something in Michael's eyes that convinced her of his sincerity, a deep weariness, the weight of someone who had to give up everything he knew in order to maintain his moral integrity. As they talked, Claire began to see Michael in a completely different way. He wasn't the spoiled playboy she had imagined, but a man who had made difficult choices, paying a high price. When he asked about her work, her family, her life, he did so with sincere interest, without the condescension she expected from a billionaire. Claire found herself telling him about her sick mother, about her architectural dreams abandoned by necessity, about the daily struggle to keep a family afloat with 2 poverty wages. Michael listened without judging, and when she mentioned the medical expenses that were draining their savings, she saw something in his eyes she had never seen in any rich man: true empathy. It was then that Michael made her a proposal that left her speechless. He needed cover, someone to help him hide his true identity, while he looked for a way to definitively resolve the situation with the Torettis. In return, he would pay all his mother's medical expenses and give her the chance to return to studying architecture. Claire looked at him incredulously. It was too good to be true, too much like a modern fairy tale. But Michael insisted. He needed her help, and she deserved a chance to realize her dreams. It wasn't charity, it was an agreement between people who could help each other. The proposal was alluring beyond all imagination, but Claire had learned to distrust promises that were too beautiful. She asked for time to think, and Michael accepted without pressure. He gave her a secure phone number and told her that whatever her decision, he would respect it. That evening, returning home to her studio apartment after her second work shift, Claire couldn't get Michael's green eyes and the feeling of his warm hands on hers out of her mind. For the first time in years, she had met someone who truly saw her, who recognized her intelligence and worth beyond the waitress uniform. Claire spent the night sleepless thinking about Michael's impossible proposal. On one side was her current life, safe but suffocating. On the other was a leap into the dark that could change her existence, but involved enormous risks. The next morning, looking at her mother Anna consumed by cancer, Claire understood she couldn't let this opportunity pass. Anna deserved the best medical care, not the basic treatments that were slowly consuming her. At the hotel, during lunch break, she found Michael waiting for her in the break room. He seemed calmer, but there was still that tension in the eyes of someone who knows he's in danger. Claire communicated her decision to him. She accepted. Michael smiled for the first time, a smile that completely transformed his face. He explained the plan. They would pretend to be married, he a financial consultant, Marcus Thornton, she Clara Thornton, architect and designer. He had already prepared perfect fake documents and rented an elegant apartment in Soho. The idea of leaving work terrified her, but Michael showed her a check for her mother's medical expenses, $100,000. It wasn't a promise, it was an immediate gift that demonstrated the seriousness of his intentions. The following days were a whirlwind of changes. Michael accompanied her to buy designer clothes, taught her how to behave in high society, explained their invented story in minute detail. During these lessons, Claire discovered the real Michael, a cultured and sensitive man who loved art as much as she did. One evening, while they were having dinner in their apartment, Michael received a phone call that made him pale. The Torettis had put a bounty on him, $1 million if he was delivered alive. The hunt was intensifying. That night, while Michael slept in the bed they shared to maintain cover, Claire stayed awake watching him. She had fallen in love with the wrong man at the wrong time, but it was too late to turn back. Her heart had already chosen. The following weeks were a period of growing intimacy for Claire and Michael. She played the role of Mrs. Thornton during the day, attending design courses to maintain credible cover.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
In the evening, she discovered sides of Michael that no magazine had ever told. Michael proved to be an excellent cook, preparing elaborate dinners while telling her about his travels. Claire listened, fascinated, realizing this man had seen more of the world than she ever would. But it was the moments of shared silence that brought them closer, when they read together, watched movies, walked through Soho pretending to be a normal couple. The first real danger came during dinner at an elegant restaurant. Two men at the nearby table were watching Michael too intently. He kept calm and began telling invented stories about their marriage, raising his volume to be heard. Claire played the part perfectly, behaving like a wife in love. The performance was so convincing that the suspicious men looked away. The physical tension between them was palpable. Glances too long, increasingly frequent contact, closeness in bed that made them wake up embracing every morning. It was during one of those mornings that everything changed. Claire woke up first and stayed watching him sleep. When Michael opened his eyes and found her staring, something broke between them. The first kiss was sweet, almost shy. Then passion took over. Making love with Michael was everything Claire had dreamed of. Not just physical attraction, but a deep connection. He treated her as if she were precious, made her feel desired in a way never experienced before. In the following days, their relationship was completely transformed. They were no longer two strangers pretending, but a real couple. Michael began talking about the future as if she were part of it, planning trips together, but reality soon returned. One evening, after making love, Michael received a call that made him sit up suddenly. The Torettis had discovered he was alive, and someone had mentioned his name in a restaurant, describing a man who could be him with a brunette woman. If the Torettis had a description of her, Claire's family was also in danger. Michael told her maybe it was time to separate, but she silenced him with a kiss. She had no intention of abandoning him. They were in this situation together, and together they would get out. The escape plan was organized down to the smallest detail during a sleepless night. Michael had contacts throughout Europe, trusted people who could help them disappear temporarily while he implemented the final strategy to free himself from the Torettis. The chosen destination was a small town in Napa Valley, so remote that even the best private investigators wouldn't find it easily. Before leaving, they had to secure Claire's mother. Michael organized Anna's transfer to a private Swiss clinic specializing in oncology, officially for a cycle of experimental treatments. In reality, it was the safest place she could stay while they hid. The trip to Napa Valley was surreal. They traveled in different cars, with different documents, meeting only at the final destination to avoid suspicion. Claire drove for 5 hours through landscapes that became increasingly beautiful. Hills golden in the autumn sun, vineyards stretching as far as the eye could see. The refuge Michael had chosen was a 16th-century villa hidden among cypresses and olive trees, completely renovated but maintaining its ancient charm. When Claire arrived and saw Michael waiting for her in the stone courtyard, she realized that for the first time in weeks, she wasn't afraid. The first days in Napa were magical. Without the constant pressure of maintaining cover, without the fear of being discovered, Claire and Michael could finally truly get to know each other. They cooked together using fresh ingredients from the local market, walked the paths among the vineyards talking about their dreams, made love with a passion that grew every day. Michael showed her his most vulnerable side, telling her about his lonely childhood in a family where everything revolved around money and power. He spoke of the constant pressure of being the perfect heir, the crushing expectations, the loneliness of never being able to be sure if people loved him for who he was. Claire, for her part, flourished in that environment. Away from the daily struggle of survival, she could dedicate herself to what she truly loved, drawing architectural projects, reading, exploring her creativity repressed by years of economic necessity. One evening, while they were dining on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the hills red, Michael confessed to her that he had never believed in true love, that he had always thought it was just a fairy tale. But with her, he had discovered that love really existed. It was that feeling of completeness he felt when he looked at her. Claire replied that for her, too, it was the first time she truly loved. She had had boyfriends before, but nothing that came close to what she felt for him. It was a love that frightened her with its intensity, but that made her feel stronger than she had ever been. It was that evening that they decided to really get married. Not for cover, not for convenience, but for love. Michael officially asked her to become his wife, to share with him not only the dangers, but also the dreams. The wedding was celebrated by the local pastor, an old priest who didn't ask questions about documents, and who was moved seeing the sincere love in their eyes. It was a simple but perfect ceremony, without luxury, but full of meaning. That night in their Napa villa, Claire and Michael made love as true husband and wife, sealing a bond that went beyond any contract. They were united by love, by mutual trust, by the will to face any obstacle together, but their idyll couldn't last forever. 2 weeks after the wedding, while they were having breakfast on the terrace, they saw a black car slowly climbing the dirt road. Michael paled, recognizing the type of car the Toretti men used. They had been found. The black car stopped in front of the villa, but the person who got out wasn't who Michael expected. It was Robert Thornton, his uncle and CEO of the family hotel chain, accompanied by a man in an elegant suit. Michael's heart was beating wildly as he went to meet the visitor, with Claire by his side, gripping his hand tightly. Robert Thornton was a 60-year-old man, distinguished and intelligent, who had managed the family empire during Michael's absence. His face expressed relief at seeing his nephew alive, but also concern about the situation. The man who accompanied him introduced himself as a lawyer specializing in mediation with criminal organizations. The news they brought was unexpected. Valentina Toretti had died in a car accident 3 days earlier, and with her also died the need for the forced marriage. The father, devastated by grief, had withdrawn all threats against the Thorntons and retired from public life. The alliance that was to be sealed by marriage no longer had reason to exist. Michael was speechless. Everything he had risked his life for had been resolved by a whim of fate. But while processing this information, he realized something fundamental. Even if there had never been danger, he would never have wanted to marry anyone other than Claire. Robert Thornton carefully observed Claire while Michael explained the situation to her. The elderly executive had seen dozens of women pass through his nephew's life, but this one was different. There was something in her eyes, in the way she looked at Michael, that spoke of true love. When Michael announced that he had married Claire and had no intention of returning to his previous life, Robert smiled for the first time. He had always hoped his nephew would find someone who loved him for who he was. Seeing the interaction between the two young spouses, he understood that miracle had finally happened. The transition to the new life was simpler than expected. Michael officially came back to life with an elaborate story about temporary amnesia after the boating accident. The media accepted the version without too many questions, too happy to have a story to tell again about America's most fascinating young billionaire. Claire found herself catapulted into the world of New York high society as the legitimate wife of the Thornton heir. It was a traumatic change, but Michael supported her at every moment, helping her navigate galas, charity events, magazine interviews. Claire's most important project was creating a foundation to support young architects from disadvantaged families, offering scholarships and job opportunities to those who had talent but no economic means. Michael supported her completely, providing unlimited resources. Her mother Anna recovered completely thanks to the treatments received in Switzerland and moved to a villa near theirs. Seeing her daughter happy and fulfilled was the best medicine she could receive. Anna adored Michael, who treated her with the respect and affection he would have reserved for his mother. 2 years after their secret wedding in Napa, Claire and Michael renewed their vows in a sumptuous ceremony at St. Patrick's Cathedral. But for them, the real celebration had been the simple one, in the Napa town, when they had promised eternal love without knowing if they would have a future together. Their first child was born exactly 3 years after the day they met in the break room of the Plaza Grande Hotel. Michael was moved holding the baby, thinking about how destiny had orchestrated every detail of their meeting. When journalists asked Claire how it felt to have gone from waitress to billionaire, she always replied that the real change hadn't been money or social status, but finding someone who loved her for who she was. Wealth was just an accessory. Love had been the true transformation. Michael often returned to the Plaza Grande Hotel, not as a guest, but as an owner who wanted to ensure employees were treated with dignity. He had established scholarships for staff children, training programs, and an assistance fund for medical emergencies. Their story became legend in New York, the waitress and the billionaire who had fallen in love while fleeing hitmen, who had built true love on foundations of danger and mutual trust. But for Claire and Michael, it was simply their life. Complicated, imperfect, but filled with a love that grew every day. Every evening before falling asleep, Claire thought back to that day in the break room when a desperate man had asked her to pretend to be his wife. Destiny had wanted that fiction to become the most beautiful reality of her life, proving that sometimes miracles begin with the most innocent lies and end with the deepest truths. Like if you believe true love can be born in the most unexpected moments, comment which moment of the story moved you most. Share to inspire those who still believe in modern fairy tales and impossible loves. Subscribe for more stories of passion, adventure, and happy endings that will make you dream. Sometimes you just need to pretend to be someone to discover who you really are. Sometimes love arrives when we least expect it and changes our lives forever. And sometimes the person we save ends up saving us.